Somehow, despite lacking the luxuries of scented candles and deodorant, early humans still managed to figure out the whole partnership thing. Sure, their idea of courtship wasn't exactly a romantic dinner under the stars, but it worked, sort of. Picture this. You're living in a small tribe of 20 to 40 people, so your dating pool consists of whoever isn't already taken or related to you. Not exactly a big selection, but hey, there wasn't a prehistoric version of dating apps unless, of course, you count a moment of eye contact while gnawing on the same piece of roasted squirrel. Flirting back then, well, it was quiet, and let's face it, a little odd by modern standards. One of the biggest gestures of interest was food sharing. If someone handed you the juiciest chunk of meat or a handful of berries they didn't have to part with, that was their way of saying, "I like you." Helping someone scrape animal hides or carry water? Oh yeah, another green flag. Romance wasn't about smooth talk or flashy moves, it was all about effort. Looks, they mattered, sort of. But let's be real, nobody was out there judging you for your outfit. Everyone was basically rocking variations of fur and dirt. What really mattered was whether you could survive. If you could hunt or forage, you had a better shot at attracting a mate than someone who spent all day carving creepy-looking statues by the fire. Pair bonds were often long-lasting, but not necessarily permanent. People stuck together for practical reasons, like raising kids, sharing food, and surviving harsh winters. But if things weren't working out, you didn't need a divorce lawyer, just less shared chores and more awkward silences around the campfire. And as for romance itself, well, it was probably a bit more flexible than we assume. Some researchers think early humans were less possessive than we are today, largely because survival needs, group dynamics, and mobility played a bigger role than personal jealousy. There were no love songs or grand declarations of devotion, just the quiet comfort of shared blanket and the unspoken understanding that neither of you wanted to get eaten alone. It wasn't exactly a fairy tale, but hey, it worked. Early humans raised families, survived storms, and got through life without ever once arguing about who forgot to do the dishes because, there weren't any dishes. Despite the constant scramble to hunt, gather, and stay alive, these early humans still found time for something uniquely human: art. Now, they didn't have fancy galleries or museums, and the concept of abstract art wasn't quite a thing, but they did have walls. Big, cold cave walls that just screamed, "Please decorate me." The earliest known cave paintings date back over 30,000 years, with famous examples found in places like modern-day France. And these weren't just random scribbles. Oh no, these featured animals like bison, deer, horses, and mammoths, often drawn with surprising accuracy and even movement, as if they were trying to capture the essence of the animals. You could almost feel the bison charging through the cave, like the original motion picture, only with way more fur and no popcorn. Bathing did happen in prehistoric times, just not quite the spa day experience you might imagine. Whether or not you got squeaky clean depended on the season, the landscape, and your personal tolerance for hypothermia. If there was a stream nearby and it wasn't frozen solid, congrats, you had yourself a bath. If not, cleanliness was more of a creative interpretation involving leaves, sand, or, on rare luxury occasions, animal fat. Yes, fat, rubbed on the skin. It sounds strange until you remember it also doubled as a kind of all-natural bug spray and insulation. 2-for-1 deal, really. Dental hygiene was even more of a wild ride. Toothbrushes didn't exist, but some folks chewed on fibrous sticks or even bones to keep their teeth from becoming a biohazard. Cavities weren't that common, no chocolate bars or caramel popcorn in the Paleolithic diet, but teeth still took a beating. Grinding stones left bits of sand in food, and tough meat wasn't exactly gentle on molars, so instead of dentists, people just lost teeth a lot. Hair care was, let's say, minimal. Most just let it grow wild, maybe tied it back with a handy vine or ignored it entirely. Lice were practically roommates. Some tried using ash, dirt, or animal oils to fend them off, while others preferred the time-honored method of scratching constantly and pretending everything was fine. Eventually, prehistoric folk started using primitive combs, basically early prototypes of the plastic disaster in your junk drawer, so some effort was made. Eventually. And let's not forget the fashion. Clothing was mostly made from animal hides, which, while durable, did not breathe, or smell good, or washing was infrequent at best, and if your outfit stank, you either ignored it or subtly shifted blame to whoever was sitting closest to the fire. Footwear, minimal. If you were lucky, you had hide-wrapped shoes. If not, it was barefoot all the way. So yes, prehistoric caves had a certain ambience, a mix of wet dog, smoked meat, and feet. But here's the twist. Early humans actually managed just fine. Their immune systems were absolute tanks. Communities had a basic grasp of what not to do, like drinking water from the same stream someone bathed in, and massive disease outbreaks were surprisingly rare. Most people probably smelled about the same, so unless you did something extreme, like roll in a decomposing animal for camouflage, which yes, happened, no one really noticed. As for food, there was no scheduled breakfast time, no omelettes, and definitely no coffee. You ate when there was food. If you woke up and found a piece of dried meat still hanging by the fire, you'd basically won the Stone Age Powerball. More often than not, though, breakfast meant foraging. Dig up some roots, swipe a few berries, and hope the raccoon thief from last night hadn't beaten you to it. So yes, prehistoric life was raw, rugged, and occasionally odorous, but somehow it worked. The menu back then, entirely seasonal. Spring brought greens, summer served up fruit, and winter, well, winter served up a steaming hot bowl of nothing. Protein was a wild card. If you were lucky, maybe you'd snag a bird, a rabbit, or an insect, and toss it on the fire, or just eat it, straight up. No seasoning, no complaints. Bugs, in particular, were always around. Nobody craved them, but hey, they didn't run fast and didn't fight back. A termite mound or a handful of juicy grubs, congratulations, you just found breakfast. 5 stars, number. But at least it was quiet on the way down. Sharing did happen, especially among family, but food wasn't exactly passed around like a holiday casserole. If someone brought back breakfast, they were either unusually kind or clearly the boss, sometimes both. Water, equally essential, slightly more dicey. Streams and rivers were the dream. If those were nowhere in sight, puddles would do the job, sort of. Boiling water wasn't a trend yet, so whatever you drank came with a potential side of microscopic mayhem. Your stomach either took it like a champ or spent the rest of the day questioning your life choices. Every now and then, someone would unearth leftovers from a more glorious time, like a big hunt, smoked meat, bone marrow, or strips of dried hide that technically qualified as food if you chewed them long enough and ignored the taste. These treasures were often hidden or stashed high up, but let's be honest, no stash was truly safe from a determined kid armed with a stick. So every morning was a bit of a gamble. You might get lucky with a few berries and a half-charred squirrel, or you might get absolutely nothing. Either way, skipping breakfast was never a lifestyle choice. It was just how the day rolled sometimes. Once breakfast, or the crushing absence of it, was out of the way, it was time to get down to business, tool maintenance. Tools weren't optional. They were the difference between dinner and death. A dull edge meant no meat, no scraped hide, and very limited defense against things that thought you looked like breakfast. Enter Paleolithic tool-making, part skilled craft, part blind faith, and entirely about avoiding smashed thumbs. The go-to materials were flint or obsidian, if you were feeling fancy, and happened to live near a volcano. These rocks chipped in ways that made sharp edges possible. The beginner kit? Hand axes, scrapers, spearheads, and the all-time classic, a rock with a handle. Surprisingly effective. Less surprisingly, not great for back pain. There was no one-size-fits-all tool back then. Each gadget had its own job. Some were for butchering, others for shaping wood, and a few were probably invented just to whack things, though no one was totally sure why. Most folks made their own tools, but, like everything else, some were craftsmanship wizards, while others, not so much. If someone could whip up perfectly balanced spear points, they instantly became the group's rock star, earning respect and a steady stream of, "Hey, make me one too," requests. Sharpening tools was a non-stop grind, literally. A dull edge wasn't just useless. It was a ticket to disaster. You either sliced yourself or wasted time trying to do the job. Stones got ground, flaked, and tested daily. And yes, sometimes you'd spend a solid 2 hours crafting something that shattered after 2 minutes of use. No complaints allowed, just start fresh and try again. Toolkits were sacred, passed down, traded, or occasionally borrowed without permission, aka stolen. Losing your sharp stuff wasn't just embarrassing, it was basically an invitation for trouble. Because, naturally, the moment you had no sharp edge on hand was usually the exact moment something with claws showed up to say hi. Every now and then, creativity kicked in. Someone might tie a rock to a stick with animal sinew and declare it a hammer. Others stumbled upon bone tools, light, flexible, and perfect for those delicate jobs. These little inventions were the humble beginnings of future tech revolutions, even if their creators were mostly just trying to cut stuff faster. Once the tools were ready and breakfast, if there was any, taken care of, it was time for the main event, the hunt. This wasn't a solo sport. It was a full-on team effort involving every able-bodied person, plus that one guy whose job was mostly yelling out helpful stuff like, "Go left," and "No, that's definitely not a deer." Big game was the ultimate prize. Mammoths, bison, wild horses. Anything massive enough to feed the whole crew for a week was worth the risk. But these beasts weren't just standing around waiting to get speared. Mammoths were fast, heavy, and had zero tolerance for hairless bipeds waving sticks around. Planning a hunt took serious coordination. Scouts went ahead to track herds, while others set up traps, pitfalls camouflaged with branches, natural bottlenecks near rivers, or if the group was feeling bold and maybe a little reckless, steep cliffs for a dramatic drop. Then came the ambush, screaming, spear-chucking, and a whole lot of chaotic cardio. The goal: something big hits the ground, preferably the animal, not you or that guy who keeps tripping over tree roots. Smaller game like deer, wild pigs, or even rabbits made for a more manageable day. You'd rely on spears, clubs, and the kind of ambushes that would make a ninja proud. If you were out solo or just hanging with a couple of buddies, traps and snares were your best friends. Of course, even hunting Bambi's cousins wasn't foolproof. One wrong move and suddenly you're sprinting after a pig, trying to convince the group that you totally had it until it did that weird zigzag thing. Sometimes the hunting party returned like heroes, hauling meat, bones, and enough bragging rights to last through winter. Other times they came back with nothing but scratches and some very creative excuses. The wind shifted was a classic. So was blaming whoever sneezed at the worst possible moment. Hunting wasn't just about filling bellies, it was about honor, glory, and occasionally someone getting stuck in a bush. Bringing home the meat wasn't just about dinner, it was social currency. Whoever landed the final blow usually got first dibs, a boost in street cred, and maybe a free pass on firewood duty. Still, sharing was the norm. After all, ticking off your crew over a haunch of meat could make the campfire feel a lot colder. Hunting was survival, yes, but also teamwork, risk, and live-action strategy. And all while trying not to get stomped by something that weighed more than your whole hunting party combined. Of course, not everyone was out there chasing prehistoric tanks on legs. Some folks had a slightly less death-defying gig, foraging. It wasn't as flashy, but let's be real, it usually got better results. You might not always snag a deer, but your odds of stumbling across some berries were solid. The foraging squad was often made up of women, elders, and kids too young to wield a spear without accidentally harpooning a tree. They covered ground like pros, hunting for plants, berries, nuts, roots, seeds, mushrooms, and anything else that didn't actively try to kill them. Knowing what was safe to eat wasn't just common sense, it was a combination of experience, trial, error, and the unfortunate occasional memorial service. Foragers developed brain maps more detailed than a GPS. They remembered where the tastiest tubers grew, which trees were generous with their nuts, and which plants looked delicious but came with a free trip to the spirit world. This knowledge got passed down with care, because mistaking snack for poison could really ruin your afternoon. But don't be fooled, this wasn't all slow-motion berry picking under the sun. Foragers had their fair share of run-ins with hungry wildlife too. Because sometimes nature likes to remind you that even salad isn't always safe. Competing with birds, squirrels, or even the occasional bear over berries? Yep, totally normal. Foraging back in the day wasn't just a peaceful walk in the woods, it was a full contact sport. And reaching for honey only to plant your hand in a wasp nest? And that was a lesson you only needed once, maybe twice if you were particularly optimistic. But foraging wasn't just about lunch, it was multitasking in its purest form. While you were out there picking berries, you might also snag some firewood, pluck a few feathers, peel some bark, or grab herbs to cure whatever mystery rash someone had that week. And of course, kids came along, mainly to help, but mostly to sample suspicious plants and cause mild panic. You had to watch them like hawks while debating if that mushroom looked sketchy or just uniquely seasoned. On the bright side, plants don't sprint away when you reach for them. Nuts don't grow antlers and charge. Compared to hunting, foraging was downright civilized. A good haul could feed everyone for a few meals, or at least keep spirits up between disappointing spear-throwing adventures. Quietly, foragers kept the tribe running. They didn't boast. They didn't need dramatic war paint. But when the hunters came back with nothing but excuses, it was the gatherers who made sure no one went to bed chewing on sadness Now, if there was one thing that made the rocky roller coaster of Paleolithic life slightly less brutal, it was fire. Fire cooked your food, warmed your freezing toes, scared off night-crawling predators, and helped you avoid tripping over your own feet after sunset. No fire, big problem. The survival rate dropped faster than a dropped hot coal. Every group had one sacred, unspoken law: do not let the fire go outside. And who got fire duty? Usually the poor soul who complained the loudest that morning or lost a game of rock. Only rock, really. Their job was to babysit the flames, feeding it sticks, poking it meaningfully, and occasionally panicking when the coals dimmed like a sad birthday candle. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival 101. Skip breakfast? Sure. Miss a mammoth? It happens. But let the fire die? That was a full-blown emergency. Starting a new one from scratch wasn't like flipping a switch. It was a labor of sweaty, splinter-filled love. You had to rub sticks together like your life depended on it, because it literally did. If your hands were cold or your wood was damp, you could be rubbing and praying until nightfall. So, smart groups kept their fire alive around the clock. Even when moving camp, someone would carry a glowing coal wrapped in moss or bark, like it was the tribe's most precious treasure. That person had one job: keep the spark alive, and if they messed up, well, let's just say it wasn't great for team morale. Oh, and fuel. Anything that burned and didn't explode was fair game. Twigs, dry wood, dried out dung. If it caught fire and didn't scream, it went in the pile. Kids often pitched in, though their idea of firewood was a little creative. Sometimes they came back with stuff that looked flammable, but definitely wasn't, like soggy logs or half-buried mushrooms. Fire duty wasn't just about keeping warm, it was basically the social hotspot of the camp. Everyone gathered round the fire to swap stories, share snacks, and debate who was next on fire watch duty. Think of the fire pit as the ancient version of a living room, except if someone nodded off, it could literally turn into a chilly death sentence for everyone else. No one got applause for keeping the fire alive, but if it went out, oh, you bet there were no excuses, just icy glares and the classic threat. Guess who's making sparks tonight? And surprise, surprise, not every prehistoric human was a cave dweller. Caves were like the luxury apartments of the Stone Age, comfy, sheltered, windproof, and with built-in walls. But good luck finding one that wasn't already taken by another tribe or some hungry wild beast. So, like the stubborn problem solvers they were, early humans built their own homes. Now, Paleolithic construction was not winning any design awards, no fancy blueprints, no architects, and definitely zero HOA rules. The mission was straightforward: keep the rain out and the crew in. If caves were a no-go, folks threw together huts or shelters from whatever was lying around. Wood, bones, mud, grass, you name it. Branches or mammoth ribs formed the skeleton, tied together with animal sinew or vines, then slathered with hides, bark, or dirt. The result? A wonky, slightly less leaky tent that was better than standing outside, but not by much. Building was a team sport. One person held the sticks, another tied knots, and a third pretended to know what they were doing. If the whole thing collapsed mid-build, no one was shocked, just picked up the mess and tried again, maybe with an extra stick or two. Weather was the ultimate boss level. Rain turned dirt floors into mud pits. Wind yanked hide coverings like nature's own redecorating project. And snow? Snow crushed shelters unless you piled on the reinforcements. That's why some groups went for seasonal living arrangements, light summer huts for quick escapes, and heavier, sturdier winter dens for the long, bitter cold. Insulation? A rare luxury. If you were lucky, animal hides covered walls and floors. If not, you just bundled up and complained a lot. The fire was always the center of camp life, ideally under a hole in the roof, to let the smoke out, though it usually let the cold in right alongside it. As for furniture, no, that was a no-go. A rock to park your behind on, a flat spot for a quick nap, and maybe a pile of hides for a decent night's sleep. Welcome to prehistoric luxury. The pinnacle of comfort was a cozy corner free of drafts and a roof that didn't drip on your face. Fancy? Nope. Functional? Absolutely. Our ancient ancestors managed to cobble together shelters that kept them mostly dry, upright during windstorms, and alive. Not exactly interior design goals, but hey, survival first. Now parenting in the Paleolithic era. No guidebooks, no podcasts, and definitely no fancy baby strollers. The moment your tiny, screaming, breakable human popped into the world, you were on full-time survival duty, protecting them from cliffs, predators, and those ever-dangerous pointy rocks, and all that while holding on to your spear and your sanity. Childbirth itself was the original group project, messy, painful, and high stakes. Make it through and congrats, you get to move on to the next level, keeping your little one warm, fed, and away from poking the fire with their curious little fingers, which they did a lot. No diapers here. Babies were wrapped in hides or plant fibers, and let's just say messes were part of the package deal. Pro tip, always put them down on rocks. Cleanup is a breeze. Breastfeeding lasted for years, since there was no powdered formula, and chewing meat for a toddler was a logistical nightmare. Discipline was straightforward and zero tolerance. If Junior wandered too close to the cliff edge, forget a gentle warning. You grabbed them by the leg and growled something like, "No fall!" Safety was non-negotiable, and lessons had to be quick. Fire, wolves, or mysterious berries. Consider these teachable moments you'd rather avoid but had to tackle before anything exploded, burned, or caused hallucinations. But life wasn't just about dodging disasters. Kids played constantly, sticks, stones, feathers, bugs, whatever caught their eye. Play was their classroom. The kid who loved throwing rocks might grow up to be the tribe's top hunter. The one who sat quietly observing elders might end up a shaman or healer. Nobody asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" You just became what your survival skills and luck decided. By age 10, kids were semi-useful tribe members, still annoying, but now actually helpful. They fetched water, gathered kindling, and chased birds off drying meat. Formal education? Nope. Just on-the-job training with a high chance of bruises and a low chance of getting lost. Hopefully. Welcome to parenting in the Stone Age. Kids back then, they didn't have toys, they had dirt and sticks, and maybe a helpful snake if they were lucky. They learned the old-fashioned way by watching grown-ups, copying them, and occasionally face-planting into a mud puddle. Nature was the classroom, and let's just say it didn't come with warning labels or a customer support line. After a long, hard day of hunting, gathering, avoiding predators, and raising tiny humans without the help of coffee or cartoons, early humans finally got to relax a bit. And by relax, we mean not actively running from something with teeth. No wine tastings or bottomless brunches here, folks. Just a smouldering fire and the hope you didn't sit on something sharp. The fire wasn't just the Paleolithic version of Netflix. It was the social hub. Once the sun dipped low enough that walking around meant risking a surprise encounter with someone's snoring dog or a wayward rock, everyone gathered around the flames. Not for fun, but because fire was warm, glowy, and, most importantly, didn't try to eat you. Here, around the flickering light, the tribe would eat, chat, and unwind. Their idea of small talk? Less, how about this weather? And more, let me tell you the time Uncle Grog tried to wrestle a mammoth. Stories were the main event. Tales of the day's adventures, near-death experiences, local ghost gossip, and the occasional fish-chasing disaster. These weren't just for laughs, though there were plenty. They were the tribe's version of Google. Need to know what berries won't kill you? There's a story for that. Want to find the best hunting ground? Ask the guy who gestures wildly while growling. Music and dancing also happened, but don't picture a coordinated flash mob. It usually started when someone decided banging rocks together was a vibe. Another person joined in with a hum or a chant that may or may not have been on key. Next thing you know, 3 kids are spinning in circles like caffeinated squirrels because no one told them to stop. Instruments? Anything that made a satisfying thump, whoosh, or squawk. Creativity was key. And then there was bragging, because if you speared a giant beast or invented the latest in pointy rock technology, you were going to mention it, repeatedly, casually of course. Oh, this old tool, just something I whipped up while not getting eaten yesterday. Status wasn't about wealth. It was about what you could do. Who could bring home dinner? Who could solve problems? Who could maintain the sacred fire without igniting their own hair? These were the people who earned respect. Let's not forget flirting. Oh yes, it happened. Subtle, cave-style flirting. You shared your food, sat a little closer, maybe didn't laugh when your crush mistook animal poop for a rare tuber. Relationships took time, because when your dating pool includes exactly 4 people, you have to pace yourself. Romance was low-key, practical, and usually involved more grunting than sweet talk. But hey, you didn't throw a rock at me today was basically a love letter. Early humans had to get creative when it came to forming relationships. Forget scented candles or deodorant, those luxuries hadn't been invented yet. The first step in courtship was simply being close to each other. And by close, I mean living in a tight-knit group of 20 to 40 people. So your dating options were basically anyone who wasn't already taken or related to you, which, let's be real, was a pretty small pool. No prehistoric Tinder to swipe through unless you count the subtle art of locking eyes over a piece of roasted squirrel. Flirting in those days? Definitely quieter, and by today's standards, kind of odd. Sharing food was a big deal. If someone handed you the juiciest piece of meat or a handful of berries they could have kept to themselves, that was basically their way of saying, I like you. Helping someone with a tough task, like scraping animal hides or carrying water, big green flag. Romance back then wasn't about smooth talk, it was about putting in the effort. As for looks, they didn't care what you wore. Everyone was rocking some version of fur and dirt. What really mattered was your ability to survive. If you were a good hunter or knew where to find the best berries, you were way more attractive than the person who sat by the fire all day carving weird little statues. Long-term relationships were common, but they weren't necessarily permanent. People stuck together for practical reasons, sharing food, raising kids, surviving brutal winters. If things weren't working out, there was no dramatic breakup, no messy divorce papers. You'd just gradually start doing fewer tasks together, and there'd be a lot of awkward silences at meals. As for sex and relationships, they were probably a lot more flexible than we might imagine. Some anthropologists think early humans weren't as possessive as people in later agricultural societies. Group dynamics, survival needs, and mobility shaped their relationship norms more than petty jealousy. And of course, there were no love songs, just quiet companionship, a shared blanket, and the mutual understanding that you really didn't want to be eaten by a wild animal alone. It might not have been kinky romantic in the way we think of it today, but hey, it worked. Paleolithic couples built families, raised children, and weathered storms, all without once arguing about who forgot to take out the trash. Mostly because there was no trash. Despite the constant need to hunt, gather, and avoid being eaten, early humans still found time for something uniquely human: art. Now they didn't have fancy galleries or museums, and the concept of abstract was probably lost on them, but they did have one thing: big, cold cave walls, and those walls totally begging for some decoration. The earliest known cave paintings are over 30,000 years old, with famous examples found in places like modern-day France. And these weren't just random scribbles. They featured animals like bison, deer, horses, and mammoths, often drawn with surprisingly accurate detail and a sense of motion. Some of them even had lines that suggested movement. Pretty impressive for a bunch of people who were just trying to avoid becoming lunch. Others had dots, handprints, or symbols, stuff we're still trying to decode like a prehistoric version of a mystery novel. What kind of tools were they using? Oh, nothing too fancy. Just basic, natural pigments like charcoal, ochre, and manganese. Basically, crushed minerals mixed with water, fat, or, gross alert, spit. And their brushes? No fine-tipped artist tools here. They used fingers, sticks, chewed-up plant ends, or hollow bones to spray pigment over their stenciled hands. That's right, prehistoric humans were airbrushing before it was cool, long before it ended up on custom motorcycle tanks. Why did they paint? Well, your guess is as good as ours. Maybe it was for storytelling, maybe it was spiritual, or maybe someone just had a flair for design and no one was around to tell them to knock it off. Some anthropologists think it had something to do with hunting rituals, kind of like a prehistoric good luck charm to ensure a successful hunt. Others think it might have been a way to pass down tips on which animals to chase and which ones to steer clear of. The artists were probably sitting around in caves by firelight, far from any living quarters, so the only reason they were creating was, well, just to create. No hustle for likes or followers, no pressure to monetize their craft, just pure human expression in its rawest form. And kids? Oh yeah, they probably had their little hands involved too. Tiny handprints found in some caves suggest the littlest members of society were being taught how to make their mark, literally. And while we'll never know who drew the first bison, there's a good chance someone was standing behind them, grunting approval or offering completely useless critique. What's really mind-blowing, though, is that this art lasted long after the huts rotted and the fire pits crumbled. Those painted animals are still charging across cave walls like they just stepped out of an ancient art gallery. Proof that even 30,000 years ago, humans needed more than just food and shelter. They needed to create, or maybe they just really liked bison. Now let's talk about getting sick or injured in the Paleolithic era, which was basically like rolling dice with the universe, except the dice were made of bone and they all landed on the bad side. No hospitals, no antibiotics, and definitely no urgent care clinics where you could Google your symptoms. Break a bone, get a cut, or develop a mysterious rash. Best case scenario, your body handled it. Worst case, the whole tribe awkwardly stood around your fire, hoping your affliction didn't look too contagious. There was some form of medical care, but it was, let's say, rudimentary. Early humans probably had a basic understanding of plants that helped with pain or inflammation. Things like chewed bark, roots, or crushed herbs might have served as their primitive version of medicine. Willow bark, for example, contains salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin. So somewhere out there, a Paleolithic person was probably the first to discover pain relief by gnawing on a tree. For wounds, they would clean them with water or whatever antiseptic plants they had, wrap them in animal hide or moss, and then hope for the best. Ah, the good old days, traveling back in the day. Oh, it was basically a full-body endurance test. Rain, wind, snow. Name a weather condition and you'd have experienced it. And all the while, probably trying to convince your 5-year-old, who definitely wasn't in the mood, that yes, you really have to keep walking up that hill. Again? Feet. Who needed them? People navigated using memory, landmarks, the stars, animal tracks, and good old word of mouth passed down through generations. The mountain that looked like a snoozing bear, or the bend in the river that smelled a little off, were as close as you were getting to street signs. Good luck, buddy, organizing the group. Now that was a bit of a military operation. Scouts would go ahead to make sure no one was waiting to ambush you, and the rest of the group would carefully follow, often in a neat, single file. If someone got hurt, you could forget about speeding up. Everyone slowed down. Bad weather, find shelter, fast. Speed was important, sure, but staying together was absolutely crucial. Getting lost in the wilderness back then, not the sort of thing you survived with just a Find My Friends app. And yet somehow people managed to cover some serious ground. Fossils and artifacts suggest that ancient humans walked across continents, and they didn't have fancy gadgets, no GPS, no water bottles, no Spotify playlist to distract them from the aching feet. Just survival instincts, sore legs, and an insatiable curiosity about what was over the next hill. Spoiler alert, probably more hills. Now, after a long day of hunting, gathering, walking, parenting, fixing tools, and generally not getting eaten by something big with teeth, early humans would end their day in the most logical place, around the fire. The sun set like a bad deadline, and without electric lights or lanterns, nightfall was more of a deal-with-it situation. So there they'd all be, gathered around the fire in that weird mix of winding down and, well, staying alive. If you were lucky, dinner might consist of roasted meat, boiled roots, or whatever poor edible thing didn't manage to escape earlier. And no fancy seating arrangements either. Everyone huddled in a loose circle, sitting cross-legged or crouched down, digging in with their hands, bones, or if they were feeling fancy, a sharpened stick. No fancy table manners, but there were definitely some unspoken rules like, don't you dare snatch the last bite unless you're the one who speared it. Basic stuff. Afterward they'd talk. Not just about survival plans or what's for dinner tomorrow, probably something that could also run really fast. No, they'd swap stories, myths, memories, and, of course, those cautionary tales about the one guy who thought hugging a porcupine was a good idea. In the Paleolithic world, storytelling was like Netflix. No buffering, no ads, just pure, unfiltered entertainment. These tales passed down wisdom, kept the kids entertained, and, let's be real, probably made everyone's hunting skills sound 30% more impressive than they actually were. Occasionally there would be some music, nothing too polished, but enough to keep the cold at bay. A bit of rhythm from voices calling back and forth, or maybe someone using a piece of bone as a flute, which, let's be honest, was probably just a slightly improved kazoo. A hollow log would make a fine drum. Sure, it wasn't a concert, but who needed one when it was keeping the chill off just a bit longer? Traveling back in the day meant dealing with whatever nature threw at you. Rain, wind, snow, you name it, you braved it. And on top of all that, you probably had to convince a tired 5-year-old that yes, they really did have to keep trudging up that steep hill. Navigation wasn't about fancy maps or GPS. People relied on memory, landmarks, the stars, animal tracks, and knowledge passed down from the wise elders. That mountain that looked suspiciously like a giant sleeping bear. Your street sign. The bend in the river that smelled a little off. Your version of a detour sign. Group travel had to be well coordinated. Scouts would venture ahead to check for danger, while everyone else moved along carefully, often in single file. If someone got hurt, the whole group slowed down to accommodate. And if the weather turned, you'd better find shelter, pronto. Speed was important, sure, but sticking together was key. Getting lost in the wilderness back then was pretty much a death sentence. Despite all the challenges, though, early humans were seriously well-traveled. Fossils and artifacts proved they wandered across entire continents on foot. No GPS, no water bottles, no Spotify, just survival, sore feet, and the undying urge to see what lay beyond the next hill. After a day filled with hunting, gathering, walking, parenting, fixing tools, and generally avoiding death, people gathered around the fire. The sun would drop faster than you could blink, and without a single street light in sight, the night would descend with no mercy. That's when the group would settle in for the evening's grand finale. Part winding down, part survival mode. If you were lucky, dinner involved roasted meat, boiled roots, or whatever edible thing didn't manage to escape earlier. Everyone sat together in a loose circle, squatting or sitting cross-legged, eating with their hands, bones, or maybe the occasional sharpened stick. There wasn't a fancy dinner table, but there were definitely unspoken rules, like don't grab the last bite unless you were the one who speared it. After the meal, the real fun began. People didn't just talk about food and survival. They shared stories, myths, memories, and cautionary tales about that one guy who really thought hugging a porcupine was a good idea. Oral storytelling was basically the prehistoric version of Netflix. No buffering, but with a little more risk of getting poked by a porcupine. These stories weren't just entertainment. They passed on knowledge, kept the kids entertained, and probably made everyone's hunting skills sound about 30% better than they really were. Occasionally, there'd be some music, rhythmic chants, or calls passed between voices. A bone could turn into a flute, a hollow log into a drum. It wasn't polished, but it didn't need to be. It kept the cold away just a little longer, and that was all that mattered. By now, everyone was pretty much wiped out. The day had sucked up every last bit of energy, and no one was in the mood for deep, soul-searching conversations. The kids, of course, were the first to drop, curled up next to their parents, or in a big fuzzy pile, looking like they'd been hit with a tranquilizer dart. The adults stuck it out a bit longer, gazing into the fire like it was about to reveal the meaning of life. Or maybe they were just zoning out. Same difference. Before anyone hit the sack, someone always made sure the fire was still doing its job. This was the unsung hero of the evening, the silent keeper of warmth and light. If the flames were looking a little sad, they got a fresh log. If the wind decided to play games, someone would move a rock or two to keep the fire in check. And heaven help the person who forgot to check, because, trust me, they'd hear about it first thing the next morning. Now let's switch gears a bit. In December of 1938, two German scientists, Otto and Fritz, were having a go at bombarding uranium with neutrons. What they got wasn't just a slightly confused element, it was a full-on split. They'd just discovered nuclear fission. The news of their little science experiment spread like wildfire through the physics world, and while the implications were still a bit hazy, one thing was as clear as day. If they could figure out how to control this, it could lead to an explosion of unimaginable power. And that freaked out a lot of people, especially in the United States. Why? Because Nazi Germany, which happened to have some of the brightest minds in physics, had just taken its first step toward creating a doomsday weapon. Enter Leo Szilard, a Hungarian physicist who'd fled Europe. The man understood what was at stake. If Hitler's scientists got their hands on an atomic bomb first, we weren't just looking at a lost war, we might be looking at the loss of humanity's future. So, along with his buddy Albert Einstein, Szilard wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning that the Germans were potentially building something catastrophic. Einstein, of course, signed it. The letter made its way to Roosevelt in October 1939, just a couple of months after World War II had kicked off. Now, Roosevelt didn't immediately go into full action mode, but he didn't brush it off either. He set up a special advisory committee on uranium. The funding, well, it trickled in like a faucet with a loose handle. At first, the US wasn't exactly ready to treat nuclear physics as the potential weapon of mass destruction it was. But as with most things, that soon changed. By 1941, the Brits had confirmed that building the bomb was actually possible. And then, of course, Japan went and bombed Pearl Harbor. The US officially entered the war, and suddenly things were moving a whole lot faster. What started off as a vague, nagging worry quickly snowballed into a high-stakes, ticking clock thriller. That's when General Leslie Groves stepped onto the scene, a gruff, no-nonsense military man fresh off building the Pentagon, because apparently constructing one of the world's largest office buildings was just his warm-up act. In 1942, Groves was handed the reins of a brand new venture with a charmingly innocent name, the Manhattan Engineer District. Its mission? Super simple on paper, build an atomic bomb before the Nazis did. In reality, it turned into the most top-secret, outrageously expensive and scientifically insane endeavor ever attempted. To lead the science side of this mad operation, Groves tapped a young, flamboyant theoretical physicist, J. Robert Oppenheimer. Think, genius with a flair for drama. The kind of guy who could calculate subatomic probabilities and recite Sanskrit poetry without skipping a beat. Together, Groves and Oppenheimer kick-started what would become known as the Manhattan Project, a $2 billion moonshot that would reshape warfare, geopolitics, and possibly the entire future of humanity. But this wasn't just a science fair project. Oh no, this was a covert empire. To make the impossible possible, the US government secretly constructed an entire shadow civilization spread across the country, like a sci-fi movie plot, except with real plutonium. And secrecy, they took it very seriously. People inside the project didn't know what they were building. People outside the project didn't even know the project existed. At the core of this covert world were three main locations. First stop, Los Alamos, New Mexico, a dusty, isolated mesa in the middle of nowhere, chosen specifically because tumbleweeds don't ask questions. This was the intellectual HQ, where theoretical physics and mechanical wizardry met in glorious high-stakes fusion. Here, Oppenheimer assembled a who's who of scientific greatness: Niels Bohr, Richard Feynman, Enrico Fermi, and a supporting cast of genius-level brainpower. Many were refugees from fascist regimes. Some didn't even know they were helping build a bomb, just that they were part of something big. Second location, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Imagine building entire industrial cities from scratch with massive factories longer than football fields. Now imagine filling them with mysterious machines designed to extract one rare isotope, uranium-235, which makes up less than 1% of natural uranium. The solution? Try everything. Gaseous diffusion, electromagnetic separation, even something called calutrons, basically giant atomic spaghetti strainers. Thousands of workers, mostly women, operated this alien machinery without any clue that they were refining bomb-grade uranium. And finally, Hanford, Washington. Welcome to Plutonium City, USA. Since plutonium doesn't grow on trees or even exist naturally in large quantities, massive nuclear reactors were built out in the wild. These reactors bombarded uranium to produce plutonium, which was then extracted, refined, and quietly shipped off to Los Alamos like the world's most radioactive Amazon Prime order. And there you have it, a secret nationwide effort powered by physics, paranoia, and a race against time. A project so monumental most people involved didn't even know they were part of it. Just another day at the office, if your office was trying to split atoms and change the fate of the world. The reactors were working around the clock, pumping out a new element and a whole new level of nightmares. Radiation leaks, contamination, and the environmental toll of the nuclear age all began right here. Over 130,000 people were involved in this top-secret venture, more people than the population of some US states at the time. They built entire hidden towns with homes, schools, stores, and of course, security fences galore. Mail, censored, phone calls, monitored. Workers were only told what they absolutely had to know. Heck, even the vice president had zero clue about what was going on until he became president. This wasn't just a science project. Oh no, it was industrial, military, bureaucratic, and in a way deeply human. People fell in love, had babies, got bored, had accidents, and, well, died, all in the name of a mysterious invention they couldn't even name. It had become a hidden America, inching closer, day by day, to creating the deadliest weapon the world had ever seen. And then there was J. Robert Oppenheimer. The guy wasn't your typical military contractor, or even your typical scientist for that matter. Brilliant? Yes. Erratic? Absolutely. Aristocratic? Definitely. Deeply philosophical? Oh, you bet. He spoke 6 languages, quoted the Bhagavad Gita at the drop of a hat, and was almost always puffing away on a cigarette. He had a sharp tongue, frail health, and this eerie ability to crack theoretical puzzles that stumped everyone else. Some people thought he was more poet than physicist, but when the pressure was on, he was the one who held the whole Los Alamos circus together. Appointed as the scientific director of the project by General Groves, Oppenheimer quickly showed he wasn't just a brainy academic, he was the human glue holding everything together. He had this uncanny knack for understanding people and politics. He could inspire loyalty and handle egos, which, considering he was working with some of the brightest minds on the planet, each with a Nobel Prize and ego to match, was no small feat. But, like any rock star, he had his dark side. His past ties to Communist Party members, his brother, and even his mistress, had military intelligence on high alert. But Groves, being the no-nonsense type, pushed forward with Oppenheimer anyway, even as his file grew thicker by the day. Despite all the drama, Oppenheimer's brilliance in turning theoretical physics into actual machinery made him absolutely irreplaceable. At Los Alamos, he worked like a man possessed, sleeping only a few hours a night, racing from chalkboard to meeting, scribbling equations, debating designs, and chain-smoking his way into dawn. He was involved in everything: atomic configurations, bomb casing designs, neutron reflectors, even making sure people sat in the right seats during briefings. But deep down, he knew exactly what this project could unleash, and he wasn't at peace with it. Oppenheimer was absolutely convinced that beating the Nazis to the bomb wasn't just a race, it was a moral necessity. But as the war in Europe started winding down and Germany's nuclear dreams went belly up, Oppenheimer began to have a bit of an existential crisis. Suddenly the bomb wasn't just a defensive weapon anymore, it was turning into a political powerhouse. And that thought? That one just wouldn't leave him alone. He had gathered some of the brightest minds of the age to create a weapon of mass destruction that was so insane it could have been dreamed up by someone in a sci-fi novel. And as they got closer and closer to completing it, they weren't necessarily marching toward victory. No, they were hurtling toward a point of no return, one that once crossed couldn't be undone. Fun, right? In private, Oppenheimer wrestled with his inner demons. In public, he was all business. As his team was putting the final touches on the bomb's design, it became crystal clear. They weren't just changing the way wars were fought, they were about to rewrite the entire human relationship with power itself. No pressure, though. By late 1944, theory was out the window. We're talking full-on blueprints, baby. Blueprints turned into actual parts, parts became prototypes, and suddenly the Manhattan Project wasn't some experimental think tank anymore. It was an industrial production line for doomsday. But here's the thing, building a nuclear bomb wasn't as easy as assembling a tank or slapping together a plane. Oh no, this was terra incognita, and nothing was going to be smooth sailing. Engineers, machinists, and physicists at Los Alamos were working on 2 different bombs, each one as terrifyingly complicated as the other. First up, we had the uranium bomb, charmingly called Little Boy. Its genius, a simple gun-type mechanism, shoot one chunk of uranium at another at high speed and bam! You get a chain reaction. Sounds easy in theory, right? In practice, though, it was a recipe for horror. The uranium itself, sourced from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, in painstakingly small quantities, each gram was basically more precious than gold, and they needed over 60 kilograms of the stuff. Every calculation had to be flawless. There were no do-overs. Little Boy was heading straight to the battlefield. No rehearsal. Then there was the second bomb, Fat Man, which was a bit of a diva. This one used plutonium, but plutonium was a temperamental little beast. The usual gun-type design wouldn't work with it. Instead of creating a chain reaction, the plutonium would just kind of fizzle out before reaching its full potential. It was a drama queen like that. They had to ditch the usual approach and invent something entirely new: implosion. That meant using perfectly timed, explosive lenses to squish a plutonium core into critical mass in just millionths of a second. Imagine trying to evenly crush a steel ball using dynamite without actually blowing the whole thing to pieces. Yeah, not exactly a DIY project. To make things spicier, plutonium was toxic, unstable, and, just to keep things fun, had only recently been discovered. The scientists were operating under extreme secrecy and even more extreme stress. Unsurprisingly, things went wrong. In 1945, a physicist named Harry dropped a tungsten brick onto a plutonium core and accidentally triggered a critical reaction. He got a lethal dose of radiation and died a few weeks later. That core, now famously nicknamed the Demon Core, wasn't done yet. Just a few months later, it claimed another scientist, Louis, in a nearly identical accident. Moral of the story? Don't play hot potato with radioactive metal. Every breakthrough came at a steep price, physical, psychological, and moral. And time wasn't exactly on their side. Germany had already surrendered. Japan was still fighting. Washington was tapping its watch. The scientists knew what they were building. They just didn't know exactly where it would go or who it would take with it. Inside the secret labs, the final components were coming together. Sleek metal casings, razor-precise detonators, and nuclear cores that practically hummed with potential. Each part was a miracle of engineering. All together, they'd become the deadliest invention in human history. Now there was only one thing left to do: test it. Not with equations, not with simulations, but with actual fire in an actual desert, in the actual real world. On July 16, 1945, at exactly 5:29 a.m., the New Mexico desert became the unwitting host of humanity's nuclear debut. The test was codenamed Trinity, and it was the first time a nuclear device had ever been detonated. The bomb they tested, a plutonium implosion model, the same type that would later be dropped on Nagasaki. It had never been tested before. Unlike its simpler cousin, which relied on straightforward physics and the power of positive thinking, this one had more moving parts than a Rube Goldberg machine strapped to a ticking clock. It could work, it could flop, or it could vaporize the test site and everyone watching. Needless to say, nerves were high. Scientists and military brass watched from observation points miles away. Some wore welding goggles, others slathered their faces in sunscreen just in case SPF 50 could stop a nuclear blast. Some folks actually placed bets on whether the explosion would set the entire atmosphere on fire. Sounds like a bad sci-fi plot now, but at the time they genuinely didn't know. Then came detonation day. The desert lit up with a flash so blinding it made the sun look like a dim light bulb in a closet. The shockwave hit hard enough to knock people flat, and the heat. You could feel it more than 10 meters away, like standing next to a cosmic oven. And then came the mushroom cloud, rising 40,000 feet into the sky like it was auditioning for a role in the apocalypse. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. One witness said it felt like watching the birth of a world. Another claimed it was more like someone had kicked open the gates of hell and said, "Welcome, humans." Meanwhile, the physicist behind it all didn't high-five anyone. No triumphant shouting. Instead, he muttered a haunting line from the Bhagavad Gita. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Yikes. The test was, by every scientific measure, a massive success, a terrifying, can't-put-it-back-in-the-box kind of success. It proved the United States now had a weapon that could erase entire cities in the blink of an eye. But it also opened the door to a giant, world-sized ethical headache. Scientists took photos, they recorded readings, they even found new green glass, formed from the heat, later called trinitite. But what really stuck wasn't the data. It was the silence afterward, the realization that humanity had just crossed a line no one could ever uncross. The whole event was kept hush-hush. The president, who was in Germany at the time, got the news through a secretive message. The baby is born. Cute phrasing for something capable of vaporizing a city. The war in the Pacific was still on. Japan hadn't surrendered, and now the US held the power to end the war in the most devastating way imaginable. The question wasn't if they would use it, it was where and when. Less than a month after the test, theory turned into reality. The US had 2 working bombs and a decision to make. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber took off from Tinian Island. Its cargo, a uranium bomb with the innocent-sounding name Little Boy. The target, Hiroshima, a city of military importance, but also packed with civilians. At precisely 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released. 43 seconds later, the sky basically lost its mind. The explosion flattened 5 square miles of the city, with temperatures hitting a mind-boggling 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the epicenter. Over 70,000 people were vaporized or crushed instantly. Fires raged. The survivors, burned, blinded, and disoriented, wandered through a nightmarish landscape of melted steel and ash. In the weeks that followed, tens of thousands more perished from radiation sickness, injuries, and the emotional fallout. The world had never seen destruction like this, and yet the war drudged on. Japan's leaders, well, they were in the middle of a heated debate. Some wanted to surrender, others wanted conditions. The US, interpreting their silence as stubborn resistance, decided to up the ante with a second strike. So, on August 9th, another B-29 boxcar, carrying the plutonium bomb Fat Man, took off. The primary target was supposed to be Kokura, but Mother Nature had other plans. Cloud cover forced a last-minute change. The bomb was dropped on Nagasaki at 11:02 a.m. The terrain here helped limit the blast a little, but the devastation was still catastrophic. Around 40,000 people were killed instantly. The blast obliterated factories, homes, and temples, and, once again, thousands more would die in the days that followed from burns, trauma, and radiation poisoning. Within hours, Japan's government was in full crisis mode, and in a truly historic move, Emperor Hirohito himself spoke to the nation. For the first time ever, a Japanese emperor addressed his people directly, announcing the country's unconditional surrender. The war was officially over, but the debates were just getting started. Did the bombs actually end the war? Or did they just create something even more terrifying? Were they a necessary evil, or was this just a grotesque flex of power? Some scientists had begged for a demonstration of the bomb's power instead of dropping it on a city. Their pleas completely ignored. Others, like General Groves, felt zero remorse. After all, the bomb had done exactly what it was supposed to do from a military standpoint. But that was the thing. The world had entered a whole new era, one where peace was only possible if you had the threat of total annihilation hanging over your head. The bomb had done its job in the most horrific way possible. Militarily, but morally, philosophically, spiritually. That's a whole different story. Those questions would echo for generations, hanging in the air like an unsolved mystery. In just 2 blinding flashes of light, the 20th century had been split in 2. There was the world before the bomb, and then there was everything after. The mushroom clouds had barely started to fade before the world, especially those who had been right in the middle of it, started to grapple with what had just happened. At the top secret lab where it all came together, the celebrations were, let's say, subdued. Sure, the bomb had worked, and yes, the war had finally ended, but the sheer scale of destruction was so staggering that even the masterminds behind it were left speechless. As photos of charred bodies and leveled cities started making their way to the lab, and survivors began sharing their horror stories, the reality of what had been unleashed started sinking in. Scientists who had poured all their intellect into creating the weapon now found themselves staring into a moral abyss. Many of them felt they had just opened a door to something far bigger and darker than they had ever anticipated. And among them, one scientist in particular was absolutely crushed by the weight of what he had helped bring into the world. Once the charming face of the entire operation, he now became a man tormented by his own creation. In a meeting with the president, not long after the war ended, he allegedly said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, though, wasn't exactly the empathetic type. According to his staff, he thought the scientist was being a bit of a drama queen, and even went as far as to call him a crybaby scientist. But the ethical dilemma wasn't just confined to one man. Other brilliant minds like Leo and James began circulating petitions calling for transparency and international control over nuclear weapons. They warned that secrecy and unchecked weaponry would only lead to an all-out arms race. Naturally, their concerns were promptly ignored. Instead, the government decided to tighten control even further. They created a commission to handle all things nuclear, and thus the Cold War began to bubble under the surface. Meanwhile, the Soviets, who had been spying on the whole project like it was their favorite reality show, were already racing to build their own bomb. As for the workers who had labored on this top-secret project, many of them, especially those at the big facilities, were starting to realize, often for the first time, just what exactly they had been involved in. Some felt a sense of pride, others were horrified. Public opinion, as you'd expect, was all over the place. American newspapers hailed the bomb as a war-ending miracle. But as the horrifying images from Hiroshima and Nagasaki began to surface, the public's enthusiasm began to wane. Questions started popping up like crazy. Could Japan have been forced to surrender another way? Were both bombs really necessary? Was this justice? Or was it just revenge? And of course, the true horror came with the long-lasting effects of radiation. A nice little cherry on top of the nuclear sundae. Survivors of the bombings, Hibushia as they came to be known, suffered burns, cancers, miscarriages, and lifelong stigma. Fallout studies began. The long-term toll wasn't just physical, it was generational. DNA damage, birth defects, psychological trauma. The war had ended, but the consequences were only beginning. The Manhattan Project had achieved its goal, but left behind a legacy of sorrow, secrecy, and ethical confusion that would define the nuclear age. Science had broken through a barrier, but humanity hadn't caught up. While the bomb was being built in secret deserts and hidden labs, it wasn't as secret as the US government had hoped. Even as America celebrated its newfound atomic dominance, cracks in its security had already begun to widen, and Soviet agents had already slipped through. The Manhattan Project had been compromised from nearly the beginning. Thanks to Soviet espionage networks, the USSR knew about the bomb long before it was dropped. Key scientists, including Klaus Fuchs, a theoretical physicist working at Los Alamos, were quietly funneling details of the weapons design straight to Moscow. Fuchs's information was so precise that Soviet engineers later admitted they used his data as a template when building their own bomb. He wasn't alone. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, American civilians with communist ties, were accused of passing atomic secrets to the Soviets. Their eventual trial and execution in 1953 shocked the nation and became one of the most controversial episodes in Cold War history. Whether they were scapegoats or genuine traitors remains debated, but the message was clear. The nuclear genie was out, and no longer in just one country's hands. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949, just 4 years after Hiroshima. It was faster than most American officials had expected. The world was now a multi-nuclear landscape, and the arms race was officially on. America's monopoly on ultimate destruction had lasted less than half a decade. What followed was a new kind of warfare, not of bullets, but of brinkmanship. Nations now held weapons that could annihilate cities with a single strike. The logic of conflict shifted. Victory no longer meant who had more troops. It meant who could survive a nuclear-first strike or deliver a deadlier one in return. Back in the US, paranoia grew. Loyalty oaths, background checks, HUAC hearings, the Red Scare. Scientists who had once been hailed as national heroes found themselves accused, blacklisted, and interrogated. Oppenheimer himself, the father of the bomb, was stripped of his security clearance in a humiliating hearing that exposed how deeply the political climate had changed. The bomb won a war, but it also kicked off a new one that's colder, sneakier, and a whole lot more terrifying. From the secretive labs of Los Alamos to the freezing, soul-crushing gulags of Siberia, a new era had dawned. In this era, silence, suspicion, and surveillance ruled the day, with the ever-looming threat of total obliteration hanging over everyone's head. Sure, the Manhattan Project officially wrapped up in 1946, but its effects, those are still kicking around. It didn't just reshape science, it practically rewired military strategies, political policies, and even how we sleep at night. The modern world was born in that atomic blast. On one hand, the project was an unprecedented scientific leap. It proved that theoretical physics wasn't just a bunch of nerdy equations. It could literally alter the course of history. That raw scientific power didn't just stop at creating bombs, though. Oh no, those same atomic principles would go on to fuel nuclear energy, drive space exploration, and even revolutionize medicine. Nuclear physics, it became the rock star of modern science. But on the flip side, it unleashed a permanent shadow over humanity. The bomb didn't just end one war, it redefined what peace even meant. For the first time ever, humans had crafted something that could wipe out humanity entirely. And ever since, that horrifying possibility has hung over every international conflict like a dark cloud. The concept of mutually assured destruction, a fancy term for we'll both go down in flames if we push this button, became the twisted backbone of Cold War diplomacy. Two nuclear superpowers armed to the teeth and locked in a game of chicken where the loser is everyone. And then came the arms race, the US, the Soviet Union, then Britain, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, kind of unofficially, and later North Korea all decided, hey, let's build our own bombs. What started as a desperate attempt to stop Nazi Germany evolved into a global blueprint for militarization. Here's the kicker, though. For all the devastation, the bomb has only been used in war twice. That fact alone is both bone-chilling and kind of miraculous. It's like the ultimate paradox. The bomb is the most powerful weapon ever made, and its sheer horror might be the very reason it hasn't been used again. Culturally, the Manhattan Project left some deep scars. In movies, books, and philosophy, it forced humanity to wrestle with the limits of progress. Can science exist without a conscience? Is it possible to have knowledge without responsibility? And then there's Oppenheimer, an icon, a walking moral dilemma. He wasn't a villain or a hero, just a guy caught in the middle of brilliance and guilt, ambition and regret. In 1965, he reflected on this in a way that no amount of vulgarity, humor, or exaggeration could quite capture. The physicists have known sin. Today, the Manhattan Project's legacy still looms large. It's in the nuclear stockpiles, the non-proliferation treaties, the ever-present tension of deterrence, and that uneasy, high-stakes peace that nuclear fear enforces. The bomb may have ended a world war, but it also ushered in something else. A fragile, uncertain era where the fate of the world can hang on the push of a single button. In ancient Mesopotamia, what you wore wasn't just about covering up or trying to look good. It was like wearing a billboard that screamed who you were. Your class, your job, your gender, and even how close you were to the gods could be spotted just by glancing at your outfit. Fashion in Mesopotamia was like an elaborate secret code, and whether you were a priest king or a humble servant, you had to follow it to the letter. The early civilizations in places like Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria had their own strict dress codes. For men, it wasn't all about the latest trends, but rather the layers of meaning hidden in their clothes. Garments ranged from simple wool or flax skirts to long, heavily fringed robes. And let's be real, those robes weren't just for warmth. They were status symbols. The more layers, pleats, and intricate embroidery you had, the more powerful and influential you looked. Royals and nobles loved flaunting their wealth with cloaks dyed in reds, purples, and blues, colours so rare and expensive they practically screamed, "I'm rich and important." These pigments were made from plants and minerals that were as costly as they were striking. Women weren't left out of the clothing game either. The elite ladies rocked finely woven gowns that wrapped diagonally across their bodies, sometimes leaving one shoulder dramatically bare. They loved a good fringe along the hems too. But don't think that was enough. Jewelry was a must. Gold necklaces, lapis lazuli earrings, and carnelian beads weren't just there to make them sparkle. They were about showing off divine favor and noble bloodlines. Bracelets, anklets, and hairpieces weren't just accessories. They were statements of spiritual beliefs and marital status. Hair was also a big deal. Men in Mesopotamia were serious about their beards. They didn't just let them grow wild, they curled, oiled, and sometimes crimped them into fancy patterns. A beard wasn't just facial hair, it was like a badge of masculinity and wisdom. Women weren't left behind either, with their hair styled in neat buns, intricate braids, or elaborate rolls. And wigs? Oh yes, wigs with a cherry on top for both men and women, especially for ceremonies or just to show off their upper-class refinement. And as if all that wasn't enough, perfumes and cosmetics were the finishing touch. Oils scented with myrrh or cedar weren't just for smelling nice, they were part of religious rituals too. Eye makeup, often coal-based, was used to ward off evil spirits and protect against the harsh sun. Let's not forget about footwear, or the lack thereof. Most people went barefoot, but the elites sometimes sported leather sandals or even silver ones just to make sure they were noticed. In Mesopotamia, fashion wasn't just for fun or for looking good. It was serious business. It was symbolic, functional, and backed by the power of religious and political institutions. What you wore could either elevate you to godlike status or ruin you. So, even 5,000 years ago, people knew one thing: appearances were everything. And in Mesopotamia, your clothes didn't just define your style, they defined your fate. In ancient Egypt, fashion wasn't just about looking good, it was about looking divine. Your wardrobe wasn't a mere reflection of your wealth or taste, it was a signal to the gods themselves. Clothes were all about purity, power, and eternal style. In a society where life and death were tightly intertwined, your outfit needed to work for both the living and the afterlife. Enter linen, the fabric of choice. Soft, lightweight, and perfect for the desert heat, linen was practically royalty. But not all linen was created equal. The upper class sported finely woven, nearly see-through linen that hugged their bodies in elegant, flattering folds. Meanwhile, pharaohs and nobles strutted around in pleated kilts and robes with fancy sashes, sometimes so starch-stiff that they practically stood up on their own. The whiter and finer the linen, the more it screamed, "I'm pure," and "I've got the gods' approval." For the ladies, fashion wasn't just sensual, it was spiritual. Elite women wore tight-fitting sheath dresses called kalissaras, often held up with shoulder straps. These dresses left very little to the imagination, but in Egyptian culture, beauty and fertility weren't just human virtues, they were divine virtues. Clothes were meant to accentuate the natural form, not hide it. Forget modesty, harmony and sacred aesthetics were the goals here. But wait, clothing wasn't the only thing that had the power to make you shine. Jewelry was basically spiritual armor. Amulets shaped like scarabs, ankh symbols, and eyes of Horus weren't just pretty trinkets, they were designed to protect you and win you divine favor. Gold was the metal of choice because apparently it's the only thing that could stand up to the god's standards of incorruptibility. Necklaces like the broad collar or wesk were worn by both men and women, layered with precious stones like turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. These weren't just for decoration, they were like personal bodyguards, but shinier. Wigs, too, were essential. Most Egyptians shaved their heads to stay clean and lice-free, but the elite? They went big with wigs, made from human hair or plant fibers. These wigs weren't just about making a statement, they were about rank and beauty. Some of them were massive, intricately braided, and even perfumed with cones of scented wax that would melt throughout the day, releasing an ever-present, divine fragrance. Talk about multitasking. And then there was makeup. Let's face it, no one wanted to go out looking less than perfect. Kohl eyeliner wasn't just a stylish accessory, it protected your eyes from the sun's harsh glare and was believed to ward off evil spirits. Both men and women rocked green malachite eyeshadow and red ochre lip stain, because when the gods are watching, and trust me, they were, looking good was an absolute must. From pyramid builders to temple VIPs to queens with serious eyeliner game, what you wore in ancient Egypt wasn't just about looking sharp. It was practically a spiritual PowerPoint presentation. Clothes were a holy billboard shouting your status, soul condition, and readiness for the afterlife. Now hop over to ancient Greece and things might look a bit breezier. Flowing fabrics, hardly a seam in sight, and more linen than a summer beach party. But don't be fooled by the minimalist vibes. Greek fashion was a quiet battlefield of identity, social standing, and philosophical swagger. The Greeks weren't into flashy frills. In the classical era, they preferred their style like their architecture, balanced, ordered, and deeply symbolic. Instead of stitching together elaborate outfits, they took big old rectangles of wool or linen, folded them in clever ways, and pinned them into place like fabric origami with an existential crisis. Enter the chiton, the Beyoncé of Greek garments. This tunic was fastened at the shoulders, belted at the waist, and came in different lengths depending on how much life you were living. Men's chitons usually hit knee level unless you were a young scholar or priest, in which case ankle length was your jam. Short chiton? You were probably lifting weights, running marathons, or swinging a sword. Long chiton? Cue the philosophical pondering. Layered over this, you had the hymation, a dramatic over-the-shoulder cloak that said, "Yes, I think deeply about the cosmos." Philosophers wrapped themselves up tight in these bad boys, turning their outfit into a wearable thesis on dignity and discipline. It wasn't just fashion, it was philosophy in fabric form. Women had their own wardrobe power pieces like the peplos. This was a heavy wool dress with a top flap called the apoptygma that doubled the fabric over the torso. Decorative, yes, but also symbolic of modesty, femininity, and social expectations. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of, is she wearing that to brunch or a religious festival? Because it could be both. Clothing in Greece also had its color code. White screamed purity and ritual cleanliness. Dark colors were for mourning or serious vibes. Saffron yellow and deep purples were luxury shades, reserved for the fancy folks or special occasions. Patterns weren't loud, but a crisp geometric border or some finely stitched embroidery could still whisper, "I know a guy." Accessories? Understated but not ignored. Men usually kept their hair cropped, while women were all about those braided, curled and bun-tastic styles, often accessorized with gold earrings, delicate hairpins, or snake-shaped bracelets that said, "Yes, I look good and I could invoke Athena." And shoes. Optional. Many Greeks strutted around barefoot, especially at home or during sacred rituals. When they did wear shoes, it was usually humble sandals or soft leather boots, nothing too flashy but always functional. So next time you throw on a loose tunic or skip shoes at a garden party, just know you're tapping into a long tradition of style meets soul, where every pleat, pin and plait had something to say. Greek fashion wasn't just about looking good, it was a full-blown lifestyle. In a world where balance and virtue were hotter than a Mediterranean summer, the way you folded your tunic or tied your sash said more about you than your entire resume. This wasn't just fashion, it was philosophy you could wear. A perfectly draped tunic whispered, "I am a model citizen." A sloppy one? Probably a barbarian. Now the Romans, they took things up a notch. If the Greeks dressed for the soul, the Romans dressed for the show. Roman fashion was less express yourself and more know your rank, citizen. Outfits were bold, heavily regulated and packed with more symbolism than a political drama. Your clothes didn't just say who you were, they screamed it in Latin with a legal clause attached. Take the toga, Rome's most famous wardrobe weapon. It wasn't cozy, it wasn't convenient. It was a giant woolly semicircle that took years of practice, or a loyal slave, to wear properly. But boy, did it make a statement. Only Roman male citizens could wear one, and if you weren't in the club, forget it. There were rules for colours, borders, and even length. A plain white toga virilis was your basic, hey, I'm an adult male citizen. A purple bordered toga praetexta? That's for magistrates and VIP kids, and the all-purple, gold-trimmed toga picta. That's straight-up emperor energy, also popular with generals parading after a good conquest. Wear the wrong toga, and you could end up shamed, fined, or worse, out of fashion and out of favour. Underneath all that grandeur, the humble tunica, a simple, knee-length garment belted at the waist. Slaves had rough, undyed versions. Freedmen got stripes just to say, I'm free, but let's not get crazy. Senators, of course, had a purple stripe, latus clavus, down the front, to remind everyone, yes, I'm important, no, I won't pass the salt. Roman fashion wasn't about standing out, it was about fitting in exactly where the empire told you to. Women wore the stola, a flowing dress paired with the palla, a shawl that doubled as a modesty cloak and occasionally sun protection. If you were a respectable matron, your stola basically shouted, I'm virtuous, don't even look at me. If you were a prostitute, legally banned from wearing one. Yep, Rome enforced morality with clothing tags, jewelry. Oh, it was everywhere. Rings, brooches, necklaces, you name it. For Roman women, it was less accessory, a more portable bank account. These sparkly statements doubled as status symbols and sometimes bribes, if the situation called for it. Hairstyles weren't any less dramatic. Think towering sculptures of curls, braids, and pins that required a squad of servants and the patience of a saint. Footwear came in many flavors, sandals, boots, and even senator-exclusive shoes called calce, featuring black leather and ankle laces, perfect for walking around being powerful. In Rome, fashion wasn't just what you wore, it was law, lifestyle, art, politics, and propaganda stitched into every hem. Dressing well didn't just make you look Roman, it made you be Roman. A toga wasn't just a toga, it was the Roman Republic turned into a woolly superhero cape. But hop over to the Persian Empire and fashion wasn't just serious business, it was a full-blown gold-threaded stage production with celestial undertones. In Persia, from the days of Darius the Great to Xerxes, clothing wasn't just meant to dazzle, it was designed to overwhelm. A Persian noble didn't walk into a room. They arrived like a walking treasure chest lit from within. Embroidered silks shimmered, gold ornaments clinked, symbols of gods, planets, and mythical beasts practically shouted, "Behold, I am important." While the Greeks leaned into crisp linens and artful restraint, Persians said, "Pass the silk and don't skimp on the embroidery." Silk, which reached Persia thanks to early trade routes, was the haute couture fabric of the elite. Embroidery wasn't just decorative, it was a status update. Robes and tunics came loaded with golden threads, cosmic creatures, and fertility-friendly patterns. The more embroidered griffins you had prancing on your chest, the closer you were to divine royalty. Men typically rocked long-sleeved tunics over trousers. Yes, trousers. In a world of robe-draping civilizations, Persians dared to go pants first. Not only was it practical, no tripping on your hem during battle, it was trend-setting. Greek and Roman tailors would eventually steal a glance and say, "Ooh, we want that." To pull it all together, literally, an ornate belt cinched the tunic, and a dramatic cloak over the shoulders added the cherry on top of this regal Sunday. Women weren't left out of the style game. Persian ladies wore long dresses with fitted bodices and a fondness for layers. Think fashion-forward onion. Sleeves were wide, veils were common, and jewelry, Let's just say if it sparkled, it was worn. Gold necklaces, gemstone bangles, rings carved like ancient Instagram filters. It was all part of the ensemble. Cosmetics weren't optional either. Eyeliner? Absolutely. Scented oils in fancy jars, of course. Rouge? Yes, please. Smelling good and looking divine were non-negotiables. And then there was the headgear. Oh, the headgear. Persian royalty sported the kauris, a tall, pointed, crown-like hat that could probably double as a sundial. Pearls, embroidery, more pearls. It was like wearing a bedazzled mountain on your head. Even the less royal among them wore embroidered caps or stylish turbans as a nod to their loyalty. Headwear was basically your VIP badge. Colours, naturally, were doing their own symbolic heavy lifting. Deep blues and purples, strictly for the upper crust. White, sacred and pure, perfect for the priests. Red and gold, the blazing colours of fire, the holy element in Zoroastrianism. Persian fashion wasn't just about looking good, it was a cosmic declaration. Every fold, stitch and gemstone wasn't random. It all whispered or shouted, "The universe is in order, the king is divine, and you, dear citizen, better dress like you know it." And you, yes, you in the skinny jeans, better know your place in the grand, ancient runway of history. Because back in ancient India, fashion wasn't just about looking fabulous, though they absolutely did. It was a full-on cosmic affair, woven with religion, climate, and the occasional touch of metaphysical drama. From the Vedic era all the way through the Maurya and Gupta empires, Indian clothing wasn't just worn, it was lived. Fabric spoke a language of philosophy, texture, colour, drape. Those weren't just design choices, they were sacred symbols. You didn't just wear a look, you aligned your soul with the universe. And at the heart of this stylish spirituality, unstitched cloth. No sewing machines here, folks. Instead of needles and seams, they went full origami, wrapping, folding and draping garments in regionally distinct and symbolically rich ways. This wasn't laziness, it was a principle. In Hindu tradition, stitched fabric was sometimes considered a no-go for religious rites. So free-flowing cloth became the haute couture of holiness. For men, the go-to outfit was the dhoti. Picture a long rectangle of fabric, often in pristine white or divine saffron, wrapped around the waist and knotted with flair. Casual? Yes. Formal? Also yes. It all depended on how you folded it. Priests had their own sacred origami routines for rituals, and every fold whispered secrets of caste, custom, and cosmic correctness. Women, meanwhile, had the iconic sari. Yes, that sari, still twirling its way through weddings and Bollywood dance numbers. But back in the day, it was a 9-yard wonder of a single cloth, wrapped around the waist and draped with poetic precision over the shoulder or head. And the bare midriff, that wasn't a fashion flex. It symbolized fertility and cosmic openness. Even temple goddesses rocked it in the exact same way. Divine chic, you could say. The blouse? Oh, that showed up fashionably late to the party. In earlier times, upper body coverage depended on things like weather, regional norms, and how much modesty was trending that season. Down south, some women went sans blouse entirely. Up north, the chill called for shawls and veils. Adaptability was key, darling. Textiles, don't even get us started. India was the VIP section of ancient fabric innovation. Cotton got its big break here. Weavers dabbled in block printing, resist dyeing, and thread so fine it could ghost you like the legendary woven air muslin of Bengal. Silk was reserved for royalty and sacred vibes, especially beloved in Buddhist and Jain traditions. And then there was the bling. Everyone wore jewelry, everyone. Necklaces, bangles, anklets, nose rings. Each piece was packed with meaning, from astrology to marriage to spiritual defense systems, i.e., evil warding talismans for the kiddies. In short, ancient Indian fashion didn't follow trends. It transcended them. It was soft, flowing, unstitched, and spiritually loaded, a wearable philosophy that dressed you for life, ritual, and the occasional rendezvous with the divine. Now hop over to ancient China, and fashion took on a whole other level of philosophical chic. There, clothing wasn't just about style, it was your ethical resume, your personal horoscope, and your RSVP to the emperor's grand cosmic party. Whether during the Shang, Zhou, or Han dynasties, what you wore screamed your status, your role in the universe, and how tight you were with the celestial hierarchy. The star of the show, the hanfu. Picture a robe with wide sleeves, perfect for dramatic exits, a crossed collar that knew how to say, "I've got Confucian values," and a waist sash to keep it all in celestial order. So next time you reach for your hoodie, remember, your ancestors were out here dressing for the gods. It wasn't just a fashion choice, it was Confucian philosophy you could wear. Every pleat, fold, and sash of the ancient hanfu was like a wearable TED talk on modesty, social order, and don't mess with the emperor. Both men and women rocked the hanfu look, but the details, oh, the glorious nitpicky details, varied wildly depending on your age, rank, event, and how many layers of dignity you could drape on at once. Colors weren't just fashion statements, they were existential declarations. Under the Zhou dynasty, they even tied each color to a natural element and a compass direction. Red, that's fire in the south, blue and green, wood and east, black, water and north, white, metal and west, yellow, that's sacred earth and the center of the universe. And unless you were the emperor himself, wearing it was basically a royal middle finger. Now, about those layers, the more robes you wore, the higher up the ladder you were, socially, not temperature-wise. Scholars and nobles wrapped themselves in so many layers, it's a miracle they could walk, let alone write poetry. Meanwhile, the common folk kept it real with hemp tunics and wool pants, tied at the waist with a belt, because when you're harvesting rice, function trumps flair. And don't even think about touching silk unless you had serious social clout, at least until silk production exploded and things got a little more democratic. Women had their own spin on hanfu naturally. Add some flowing skirts, a few elegant sashes, and hair that could double as a structural engineering marvel. Hair was long, artfully pinned, and bedazzled with jade combs, golden twigs, or flowers. The fancier your updo, the more cultured you were. Letting your hair down in public after childhood? Scandalous, absolutely not. Accessories were the secret code books of the time. Jade wasn't just pretty, it stood for immortality and moral virtue. If your pendant featured a dragon, phoenix, or cloud, it meant you were literally radiating blessings and good character. Even shoes played the status game. Pointy toes and platform soles meant you were walking the path of elegance, not, walking to the pig pen. Ancient Chinese fashion wasn't just about looking good, it was a textile-based symphony of harmony, hierarchy, and high moral fiber. Dressing properly wasn't just polite, it was patriotic, it was spiritual, it was the fiber of civilization, literally. Now, over in the wild lands of the Celts and Germanic tribes, things looked a little different. To Roman eyes, their fashion was a hot mess, chaotic, brash, and unfit for polite company. But to the people wearing it, it was glorious, it was bold. It said, "I'm a warrior, not a bureaucrat." Their clothes shouted kinship, strength, spiritual swagger, and fierce individuality. While Mediterranean fashion loved its rules, structure, and one-toga-fits-all vibes, the so-called barbarians were out there expressing themselves with furs, braids, and more flair than a Renaissance fair on fire. And thus begins the tale of the Celts. Spread out across Gaul, the British Isles, and parts of Central Europe, Celtic men and women rocked brightly coloured woolen clothes dyed with all natural plant and mineral pigments, basically nature's original fashion line. Patterns weren't just for show. Plaids and checks were like ancient Instagram handles, instantly signalling your tribe or clan. Way before tartan became a thing in Scotland, these styles were the ultimate ID badges. Men typically sported long-sleeved tunics, cinched at the waist with belts, paired with trousers called bracca, a bold move away from the flowing robes favoured by the Romans and Greeks. These pants were warm, stretchy, and perfect for galloping on horseback or charging into battle. Speaking of battle, warriors often went shirtless, proudly displaying tattoos and blue war paint made from woad, part intimidation tactic, part sacred ritual, all badass. Celtic women layered up in dresses or skirts topped with shawls or cloaks, fastened by fancy brooches called fibulae. Jewelry was never minimal. Think thick neck rings, torques, bangles, spiral earrings, and amber beads. These weren't just accessories, they shouted wealth, status, and sometimes a touch of mystical protection. Hair was a big deal too. Both men and women braided or twisted their locks, sometimes bleaching them with lime for extra drama. Men especially liked rocking long moustaches and beards, the bigger and bushier, the better, especially if you were a warrior or chieftain. Meanwhile, the Germanic tribes, from Goths to Saxons, had their own take on wardrobe essentials: tunics, wool cloaks, and layers of fur. Animal hides weren't just for warmth. Capes trimmed with teeth and claws made strong style and spiritual statements. Metalwork on belts, clasps, and weapons featured fierce motifs: wolves, boars, eagles, animals believed to pack serious mystical punch. Roman historians might have rolled their eyes and called these tribes uncivilized, but their clothing told stories of mobility, identity, and deep spiritual ties to their land and ancestors. In a world full of migrations and battles, your outfit was your flag, your shield, and your legend, all stitched together in wool, leather, and bone. Fast forward to the Byzantine Empire, where fashion took a total makeover. Gone were the tribal vibes, replaced by a mashup of Roman power, Eastern luxury, and Christian symbolism. Clothing wasn't just about flaunting status or wealth, it was a sacred language. Every thread, gem, and embroidered icon was part of a divine political spectacle. The emperor, seen as God's earthbound alter ego, wore robes so ornate and heavy with jewels they practically screamed theatre. His signature look, the loros, was a long jewel-studded sash wrapped and draped in a way that would make even the most dramatic red carpet jealous. Gold thread, you bet. Luxury was stitched right into his very fabric. Pearls, sapphires, and garnets weren't just accessories in Byzantium, they were practically part of your wardrobe. They were literally sewn into your clothes. Spotting the emperor was like catching a glimpse of a divine fashion show. He didn't just dress like an icon, he was one. And colour? Oh no, colour wasn't just about preference. It was serious business. Purple, made from the outrageously rare murex snail, was strictly imperial property. If you were caught rocking even a hint of royal purple without the proper pedigree, let's just say your fashion statement could land you in a not-so-chic prison cell. Even a tasteful little violet trim on your tunic could scream, "I'm buddies with the emperor." Everyone had their own dress code: senators, priests, generals. It was like Hogwarts houses, but with more embroidery. Byzantine style was all about layers, dignity, and making sure no one saw your knees. Men and women both wore flowing tunics called delmatica, with wide sleeves and vertical bling stripes called clavae, think runway-ready priest robes. Cloaks like the chlamys went on top, fastened with brooches shaped like doves or crosses, because nothing says humility like a giant golden pigeon on your chest. Women's fashion. Think divine elegance meets silk obsession. High-born ladies draped themselves in long-sleeved gowns with tight cuffs, shimmering silks that could blind you on a sunny day, and headgear that could double as a small chapel. Veils, yes, crowns, obviously. Jewelry, so much jewelry. We're talking chandelier-level earrings, multi-strand necklaces, and gold belts encrusted with tiny saints. Even their shoes sparkled. Basically, if it didn't glint, it didn't count. Religion was the runway. Crosses, angels, holy slogans. You'd find them on belts, pins, robe hems, you name it. Churches weren't just sacred spaces, they were style museums with saints and royals mosaicked into the walls, flexing their fashion game for eternity. And it wasn't just the elite. Merchants, scholars, monks, servants. Everyone had their own uniform straight from the holy dress code. In Byzantium, you didn't dress for the season, you dressed for your destiny. Style wasn't personal, it was theological. Your outfit wasn't just an outfit, it was your scripture, woven in silk and sanctified by tradition. As for vision problems, before glasses came along, bad eyesight was pretty much a one-way ticket to unemployment. If you couldn't see well, reading or doing delicate handiwork was out of the question. Nearsighted, or might as well kiss your scribe career goodbye. If you were far-sighted back in the day, tasks like sewing, carving, or copying manuscripts were less daily routine and more daily torment. And for most of human history, if your vision started to go fuzzy, the best you could do was squint harder and hope for divine intervention. Ancient societies knew that eyes could go wonky, but fixing them, that was a no-go. The earliest written mention of this visual tragedy comes from ancient Egypt. As far back as 1500 BCE, medical papyri describe symptoms that sound suspiciously like presbyopia, also known as "why can't I read this papyrus anymore?" Their solutions, though, involved more magic spells and herbal brews than actual optics. Not a single lens in sight. The Greeks and Romans weren't blind to the issue either, pun fully intended. In the 1st century CE, the philosopher Seneca the Younger reportedly read books by looking through a glass globe filled with water. Basically, he invented the world's first fishbowl magnifier. It worked. Sort of. But wearable? Not unless you wanted to walk around with a puddle on your face. The first real progress came during the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars in cities like Baghdad and Cairo were all about that optical life by the 9th century. The legendary Al-Hazan, aka Ibn al-Haytham, wrote the Book of Optics in the 11th century, in which he explained how light enters the eye and how lenses bend it. Genius stuff, but still no glasses. Instead, readers had reading stones, polished lumps of glass or crystal that you had to plop right on top of the page. Effective? Sure. Convenient? About as much as reading through a doorstop. These reading stones were doing their clunky job in Europe and the Middle East by the 10th or 11th century. They were better than nothing, but still more paperweight than prosthetic. You could only see one line at a time, and moving them around was about as graceful as dragging a rock across parchment. Then, cue triumphant music came the 13th century, and with it, the glasses game-changer. In northern Italy, likely in artisan wonderlands like Pisa or Venice, someone had a brilliant idea. What if we took those magnifying lenses and made them wearable? Boom! Eyeglasses were born. These early specs were not fashion-forward. No temples, no sleek curves, no fancy branding, just convex lenses for presbyopia, mounted in frames made of whatever was lying around. Wood, bone, leather, metal. You'd either balance them on your nose or pinch them together like a visual tuning fork. But hey, they worked. By 1306, a Dominican friar named Giordano da Pisa was hyping the invention in a sermon, saying it had only been around for about 20 years. That puts their debut in the 1280s, aka the era when glasses officially stopped being science fiction and started being real-life vision savers. A lot of the credit goes to Venetian glassmakers, who were already masters of delicate, high-quality crystal. On the island of Murano, they began crafting clearer, more consistent lenses, which soon found their way into the hands and onto the noses of monks, scribes, and scholars, who were quite literally seeing their work in a whole new light. Back in the day, if your vision started going blurry, you didn't head to the optometrist because, well, there weren't any. Early eyeglasses were a DIY affair. You just tried on different lenses until the world looked less fuzzy. No prescriptions, no puff tests, just pure trial and error. People didn't even really grasp the concept of nearsightedness yet. That's right. Glasses for distance vision were centuries away from making their debut. But despite the lack of scientific finesse, the impact of this invention was monumental. In a world that prized reading, learning, and religious devotion, eyeglasses were basically a time machine for the elderly. Suddenly, aging didn't mean retiring from relevance. Monks could keep meticulously copying manuscripts without squinting like they were decoding ancient riddles. Doctors could still make sense of anatomical diagrams without guessing where the spleen was. Artists could continue painting fine details instead of switching to abstract blobs. Spectacles gave people a second act, a late career comeback powered by convex lenses. At first, these magical see-better devices were mainly the playthings of monks and scholars. Glasses were pricey, and let's face it, most folks couldn't read anyway, so demand was limited, but word spread fast. By the early 1300s, spectacles had popped up across Germany, France, and England. Two humble lenses in a frame had quietly rewritten the rules of human productivity. Losing your vision was no longer the end of the story, it was just a plot twist. As the 14th and 15th centuries unfolded, eyeglasses marched out of monasteries and into the calloused hands of the emerging middle class. Just in time, too, Europe was getting louder, busier, and more literate. Towns were growing, trade was booming, and urban life was on the rise. Reading became a job requirement for merchants, artisans, and bureaucrats. And with that came a booming market for seeing things up close. Presbyopia, the fancy name for my arms aren't long enough to read this, became a perfectly manageable nuisance rather than a career-ending curse. In this era of ink and arithmetic, glasses became unsung heroes of economic growth. By the 1400s, they were being hawked by everyone from peddlers to pharmacists to that guy shouting deals on the corner. They weren't exactly high-tech, just simple convex lenses stuck in wire or horn frames, worn by either pinching your nose or tying them to your face like some kind of medieval goggles. Were they comfy? Absolutely not. Did they work? You bet. For many folks, slipping on a pair was like unlocking HD vision after years of looking through a foggy window. Then came 1450, and with it, a plot twist worthy of a Netflix drama, the printing press. Suddenly books weren't rare treasures, they were mass-produced commodities. Pages poured off the presses, and with every new book, the demand for eyeglasses shot through the roof. Literacy rates inched higher, and eyeglasses morphed from monk accessories into essential everyday gear. They started out as elite gadgets, but by the time Europe was drowning in printed pages, they had become the clear-eyed allies of anyone who needed to read, write, or count. Spectacles weren't just helping people see better, they were helping society think better, work better, and move faster. Not bad for two little pieces of glass. They transformed into the ultimate gadgets of the information age. Eyeglass making went from a casual craft to a specialized art form. By the late 1400s, spectacle makers in a certain German city had already formed one of the first dedicated guilds. Meanwhile, Venice and Florence were hustling hard, turning out lenses like pros. These early eye gear wizards didn't give eye exams, no say-ah here, but they whipped up a whole lineup of lenses with different strengths. Shoppers would just pop by market stalls and try on different lenses until something clicked. Glasses also started to change their vibe. At first, they screamed wise old sage or studious saint. Renaissance paintings loved showing off glasses as a symbol of brains and spiritual depth. But as the middle class jumped on the bandwagon, glasses became the go-to badge for literacy, professionalism, and street-smart business savvy. Suddenly, glasses weren't just fancy nerd props. Nope, they were becoming downright revolutionary, practical, and absolutely essential. Enter the 17th century, a total game-changer in how people saw, literally, vision. It wasn't just about reading books anymore. It was about cracking the physics of light. This was the era of the big brain squad, guys like Galileo, Kepler, and Newton. They weren't just staring at the stars, they were figuring out how light and lenses actually worked. Their discoveries flipped astronomy and optics upside down, turning eyeglasses from humble folk tools into serious scientific gear. Kepler, the OG optics whiz, was the first to explain how convex and concave lenses fix vision, telling apart nearsightedness from farsightedness. Finally, lenses made sense in terms of precise light bending, not just guessing and checking. Meanwhile, Galileo took those fancy lenses and built the first practical telescope, and others cooked up microscopes with similar tricks. Suddenly, the same glass that helped you read your favorite novel was helping humans decode the universe and even the tiniest invisible worlds. This new optical know-how made eyeglass makers sharpen their skills. With a better grip on focal lengths and lens curves, opticians began crafting lenses that actually did what they promised. The trade got a glow-up. Spectacle makers in London, Paris, and Amsterdam proudly called themselves opticians, a snazzy title rooted in science rather than just selling eyewear. Glasses themselves got a little facelift too. Most were still clunky and pinched noses like a grumpy cat, but some featured leather nose pads, riveted hinges, or short handles called temples, early attempts to keep the glasses from taking a nosedive. Over in China, folks were already rocking glasses with silk cords looping around their ears, and Europeans gradually caught on, making glasses less of a juggling act and more of a stay-put accessory. Here's the scoop on how eyeglasses got their groove back in the day, with a twist of humor and flair. Once upon a time, glasses were basically for folks who struggled to see things up close, the old far-sighted crowds squinting at their scrolls. But then bam, along came the concave lenses, the superheroes for nearsighted folks who couldn't see the board in class or the squirrel across the park. Suddenly, young whippersnappers could rock specs and actually spot stuff far away. Glasses were no longer just for the wizened and wise, they became a tool for everyone. By the late 1600s, glasses stepped into the spotlight not just as nerdy necessities, but as badges of brain power. Rooted in physics and curiosity, basically science nerds doing their thing, eyeglasses transformed from mere helpers into symbols of the Enlightenment. Improving your vision wasn't a game of luck anymore, it was serious science, baby. Fast forward to the 1700s and glasses got a major glow up. No more pinching nose torture devices. Instead, enter the temple spectacles. Glasses with arms that hooked over your ears, pretty much the ancestors of what you're probably wearing right now. These arms weren't just practical, sometimes they folded, flexed, or even came wrapped in silk or ribbon because why not? Materials got fancy too, tortoise shell, horn, silver, and even gold frames popped up, letting the rich folks flaunt their specs with a little bling. The elite didn't stop there, they customized their glasses with engravings and jewels, turning eyesight aids into bona fide fashion statements. Glasses went from desk to salon, coffee house, and court, turning intellect into the latest trend. Wearing specs was basically the original looking smart accessory. And then the ultimate spectacle flex, a certain clever gent, let's call him the bifocal guy, cut two lenses in half and fused them together. Voila, one pair of glasses for both reading close up and seeing far away. No more juggling between two pairs. Talk about multitasking. Around the same time, handheld magnifiers or quizzing glasses became all the rage. The upper crust rocked these on chains around their necks, using them more to signal their wit and wealth than to actually improve their vision. Aristocratic ladies weren't left out either. They had the lorgnette, a chic pair of spectacles with a handle that could be flicked open at the opera or while reading, combining elegance with function. In the 18th century, glasses weren't just about seeing better, they were about being seen. They turned into symbols of sophistication, intelligence, and yes, even a little flirtation. No longer just the telltale sign of getting old, spectacles were the hottest accessory, framing more than just your eyeballs. They framed your whole vibe. They shaped more than vision, they framed identity. The 19th century didn't just fire up steam engines and factories, it also brought a major glow-up for eyeglasses. Gone were the days when spectacles were handmade trinkets reserved for the elite. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution, glasses became a hot commodity for the masses, kind of like the iPhones of their time, only with fewer TikToks and more book reading. Before all this technological jazz, each pair of glasses was a handcrafted labor of love, artisan-made, one at a time, like sourdough bread before everyone had a starter kit. But then machines entered the chat. Glass cutting, metal shaping, lens grinding. They all got faster, cheaper, and more precise. Suddenly, clear vision was no longer a luxury. It was an everyday possibility. By the mid-1800s, you could buy eyeglasses at general stores or even order them by mail, which was basically the 19th century version of online shopping, minus 2-day shipping and angry tweets about lost packages. Forget opticians, you became your own eye doctor. People would simply try on different pre-made lenses, swapping them out like socks until one pair made the world snap into focus. Not exactly state-of-the-art care, but hey, it worked. And let's talk style. Eyewear wasn't just about seeing, it was about being seen. New materials like steel, nickel, and a fancy early plastic called celluloid started replacing bougie options like horn or tortoise shell. Frame styles diversified like never before. The pince-nez, a nose-pinching, temple-free wonder, was the go-to for scholars and dapper gents alike, and those iconic round wire rims. Long before they were rocking the noses of Lenin and Gandhi, they were the accessory of choice for students and professionals looking to level up their intellectual game. Kids got in on the action too. With public education on the rise and literacy booming, young eyes needed help keeping up. Teachers and parents began to realize that a child staring blankly at the blackboard wasn't being rebellious, they just couldn't see. Shocking, we know. Meanwhile, eye science was getting its act together. Ophthalmology became a real deal medical field, and eye exams started to standardize. In 1862, a German eye doc named Hermann Snellen gifted the world the Snellen chart, that big E, followed by smaller and smaller letters. It revolutionized vision testing and gave school nurses and DMV workers something to point at forever after. Culturally, glasses were getting a much-needed image boost, where once people were embarrassed to wear them, looking at you 1700s vanity, the 19th century made specs a badge of intellect and social mobility. Glasses became a symbol of seriousness, smarts, and solid middle-class vibes. They weren't just useful, they were respectable. By the time the 20th century rolled in, glasses had become an everyday essential. They were spotted in classrooms, factories, courtrooms, and even on the front page of the news. Vision had been industrialized, democratized, and let's face it, stylized. Eyeglasses weren't just tools anymore. They were a movement, a cultural icon, a frame for a clearer, smarter, better-looking world. This was the century when vision got personal, where science and style locked arms like an odd couple at a fashion show. Eyeglasses stopped being just hunks of metal and glass perched on your nose. They became identity badges, just as unique as your fingerprints. And thus began the great eyewear arms race, a spectacle of innovation that would redefine eye care forever. Back in the early 1900s, wire-rimmed glasses were still all the rage, especially among the brainy crowd and anyone who used the word therefore in regular conversation. But mass production was speeding up like a caffeinated assembly line, churning out new styles, shapes, and materials faster than you could say astigmatism. Enter the 1920s and 30s. Plastic was the new black. Celluloid and other snazzy materials opened the floodgates to frames with flair. Thick, black rims became the visual equivalent of a firm handshake, confident, bold, and slightly intimidating. Glasses were no longer a shameful secret you only wore around the house. They were front and center fashion pieces, as unapologetic as a peacock in a power suit. Then Hollywood jumped into the fray and, oh boy, did things get dramatic. One slapstick star with round horn-rimmed specs made nerdy cool decades before it was mainstream. Later, the screen sirens and brooding heartthrobs of the silver screen strutted their stuff in glasses that screamed iconic, not optically impaired. Spectacles were no longer the understudy, they took the lead. World War II naturally cranked up the innovation. The military needed optics that could survive war zones and bad weather, so lenses got tougher, coatings got smarter, and frames slimmed down like they were prepping for boot camp. Standard issue military glasses were born, practical, indestructible, and, well, about as attractive as a potato. Soldiers jokingly dubbed them birth control glasses, effective deterrents apparently. Then in 1958, game changer alert, plastic lenses hit the scene, lighter, safer, and less likely to shatter into your eyeballs during a mishap. These, paired with photochromic lenses that could switch moods with the sun, made eyewear not just comfortable, but cool. Add in contact lenses, finally soft, wearable, and no longer medieval torture devices, and the world suddenly had options. The 1960s came in swinging with cat-eye flare and psychedelic colors. The 70s, say hello to oversized aviators big enough to land planes on. The 80s turned everything up to 11, chunky frames, bold colors, and enough attitude to fill a boardroom and a boombox. By the 90s, things mellowed out with minimalist rimless frames, making their way into tech startups and college lecture halls alike. Glasses had officially evolved from mere visual aids into cultural megaphones. They spoke volumes about politics, intellect, rebellion, and whether you listened to punk rock or classical music, whether you were a beret-wearing beat poet sipping espresso or a hoodie-clad coder staring at lines of code, your frames told your story, loud, clear, and stylishly. The 20th century didn't just help us see better, it gave our vision a total makeover. Then the 21st century said, "Hold my contact lens," and dragged our humble eyeglasses into the digital age. Screens became our constant sidekicks on desks, in pockets, even strapped to our wrists. Naturally, our eyes were not thrilled. Enter the evolution of eyewear yet again. What started as a medical fix-it job morphed into a fashion statement, and now it's a full-blown tech upgrade. Glasses got smarter, sleeker, and shockingly personalized. One of the biggest breakthroughs, digital lens crafting. Back in the day, lenses were shaped from a one-size-fits-none prescription mold. Now, computer-guided sorcery sculpts lenses precisely to your eyeballs, factoring in everything from the tilt of your head to how far you hold a book when pretending to read it. Progressive lenses, those magical multitaskers that blend near, mid, and far vision, also got a glow up. Remember when they used to make you feel like you were trapped inside a funhouse mirror? Yeah, that's mostly history. Then came the blue light crisis. As people clocked 8, 10, even 12-hour shifts bonding with their screens, our eyeballs began waving tiny white flags. Dry eyes, headaches, blurry vision. Basically, the optometrist's version of you up. So lens makers got busy inventing blue light blocking coatings that claim to reduce fatigue and maybe even help you sleep better. Is the science still debating itself? Sure, but that hasn't stopped the stampede of demand. Frame tech didn't want to be left out, so it also got a makeover worthy of a sci-fi movie. Ultralight materials like titanium, memory metal, and carbon fiber made glasses so light you'd forget you're wearing them, until you accidentally sit on them, of course. Bonus features include flexible hinges, allergy-proof coatings, and build-your-own-style modular frames. Eyewear is now Lego for your face. And just when you thought glasses couldn't get any cooler, boom, smart glasses. Early versions, you know who you are, stumbled a bit, caught between Jetsons, and what is happening? but the concept stuck around. The new wave includes built-in speakers, tiny cameras, fitness tracking, and even mini head-up displays. Tech companies are still hunting for that sweet spot where function meets fashion and doesn't scream, "I'm from the future and I've seen things." Buying glasses? That's changed too. You can now virtually try on dozens of frames from your couch while wearing pajamas and avoiding all human contact. Upload a selfie, click a few times, and voila, prescription lenses on your doorstep. The democratization of designer vision is here, and it's fabulous. And let's not ignore the style game. Whether you're into round frames that scream, "I own 3 typewriters," or minimal chic that whispers, "Don't talk to me before coffee," glasses are now a full-on identity flex. In our hyper-connected world, glasses don't just help you see, they help you block blue light, stream music, count your steps, and channel your inner fashion icon. As we squint optimistically into the future, the line between glasses, gadgets, and glam is all but erased. Or we're not just correcting vision anymore, we're enhancing it, upgrading it, maybe even merging with it. The future? It's not just about seeing better, it's about being better. With really, really smart glasses, seeing the world differently is about to get a serious upgrade. One of the coolest frontiers? Smart eyewear. Picture this. Glasses that don't just sit on your nose but blast digital info, directions, notifications, translations, and even 3D objects right into your line of sight. No phone fumbling required. Big tech players are sprinting to make these AR spectacles the new normal, aiming to turn communication into something instant, invisible, and totally immersive. Think smartphones, but way cooler. Meanwhile, your everyday prescription lenses aren't slacking either. Imagine adaptive lenses that change focus automatically, goodbye, bifocals, and the awkward glass switcheroo. Using snazzy tech like liquid crystals or electrochromic materials, these lenses adjust on the fly based on where you're looking, the lighting, or your eye's mood swings. Magic? Nope, just science. On the medical front, things are looking like a sci-fi movie. Gene therapies and stem cell treatments are starting to show serious promise for curing certain kinds of blindness and bionic eyes. Yeah, those retinal implants and brain-computer interfaces, once only dreamed up by nerds, are now real tech, aiming to bring back some vision to the blind. If all this pans out, glasses might evolve from help-me-see devices into temporary stepping stones before we go full cyborg with internal or neural vision solutions. But don't toss your specs just yet. Fashion is keeping glasses firmly in the spotlight. Designers are mixing classic vibes with future tech. 3D printed frames, recycled materials, modular parts, and colors you can tweak to your heart's content. Style meets function, and the result is eyewear that's as personal as it is practical. And let's not forget virtual reality headsets, which have slimmed down from bulky bricks to slick, goggle-like portals, borrowing heavily from optics to immerse you in digital wonderlands. From a humble monk's reading aid back in the 13th century Italy to a dazzling blend of medical marvel, digital gateway, and style statement today, eyeglasses tell a story. It's not just about seeing the world clearer, it's about how the world sees us, evolving one lens at a time.